So thank you very much for having me. Yes, my name is Thomas Joy. I'm the creative director at Beacon Agency. We're a startup marketing agency focusing on the smart home and the IoT industries, based over in the UK. And when I say startup, I mean we're still only a few months old. But in that time, we've been working with retailers, manufacturers, distributors, data companies throughout the world already. So it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. Unfortunately, Jess, our co-founder and managing director, couldn't be here this evening, but she'd have loved to have been. And we also have Laura, our director of accounts as well. So I wanted to talk to you today about the state of the smart home industry in terms of marketing. What some of the current problems that the industry is facing, and how we as an agency are beginning to look to try and tackle those, but also what responsibility the industry as a whole has to try and tackle some of those issues as well. So really, the whole reason that we started this agency was for one simple reason. The smart home has an image problem. The smart home market industry is a good 25, 30 years old. But you ask one question and you will get 100 different answers depending on who you ask. And that question is, what does the smart home mean to you? Now, for those of us either in the industry or in product design and things like that, there's going to be 100 different answers in this room, let alone the standard person on the street who doesn't know much about it. And that leaves us in a very difficult position as an industry, because nobody knows what the industry is. No one knows what the market is. No one knows what people want from the industry. And more so than that, the industry itself can't agree on what people don't agree on. So you've got an industry that's 25, 30 years old, that's pretty much still at square one, because it's still trying to find its feet. It's still trying to work out what it is and why it exists. So we started, okay, right, let's ask the question, what does the industry actually agree on? Because you've got distributors, you've got manufacturers, retailers, people that have been working and designing products and services for years and years and years, but to what end? So in London last November, the UK Smart Homes and Buildings Association posed the question to the industry, and they said, okay, what's stopping the smart home really taking off? And also, how do we overcome the barriers to the adoption of the smart home? We put together a couple of the comments that people said, and I'm going to show you the video that came out of this, and just talk about some of those responses. Now, I must apologize, because that definitely becomes a bit of a marketing video for our own agency at the end there. And I promised that when I put it in, I was like, okay, this is good. This is the content that I'm after. And then I rewatched it this afternoon as I was going through this and thinking, oh, well, that looks a little bit gratuitous. So I apologize. But the important message that came out, and this is from Amazon, Google, Bosch, Sky, T-Mobile, Deutsche Telekom, communication is the problem. Communication within the industry, communication from the industry to the market, communication back from the market into the industry. This all comes down to not just the products themselves, but how people are consuming them and why people are consuming them as well. So that leaves us as a smart home marketing agency with a problem, is that we don't actually have much to work with at the moment. But the really important thing that came out of all of that, and this is talking to the market and talking to people within the industry itself, features are not going to sell smart home products. Now, for an industry based on often hardware, features have been more or less what people know and work with. The problem and the difference with the smart home industry is that when you are delivering features, they are like this, or an intercom, or a thermostat. You're delivering features that people already have in their homes. And if you're focusing on those features, you're not going to be able to sell your product. So then we have to ask the question, okay, how do we as an industry move on from that? And we need to fundamentally shift what it is that we're putting to the consumers. We need to change the conversations that they're having with us. At the moment, when we go out and we offer a smart light switch, a smart light bulb, a thermostat, a video doorbell, for example, most of the time, and the reason that it's not really taking off, people are saying, well, I have something that already does that. Why, what's the point? What is the value added? And that's something that at the moment, the industry doesn't really have an answer for. If we as an industry can change the response of the consumer to move from, I already have something that does that, to how can it help me? How does it improve my life? That's half the battle, because then we can start answering those questions. And it's one of the reasons that we set up a bit of a plug there, the Smart Life podcast, was a way for the industry to start breaking down some of those barriers that exist between the industry and the market. And one of the key things that came out of the first episode was that it's not about what the products do, it's how they improve our lives. And some of the content that people have been most responsive to, we found since we released it, was us as industry professionals talking about how our smart homes have changed our lives. A perfect example of this is the smart light bulb. Hands up, how many of you have like smart light bulbs or things like that in your home? Okay, so not a huge amount, but fair. That's fine, it's my job to try and convince you otherwise. Now at the moment, if you take a smart light bulb and you ask the question, what does it do? If you focus on those features, what it does, well, you can turn it on with your mobile phone. You can set up geofencing so it turns on when you're coming home. You can change colors. And that's it. If you're focusing on features, that's what it does. It's a light bulb. It's not particularly sexy. It's kind of hard to sell. But if you ask, how can it help? What difference does it make to my life? One of the most powerful examples we had, and this came out of the first podcast episode, was that there was a lady, she's single, she lives at home on her own with her dog, works full time, and normally leaving her dog alone during the day, it's absolutely fine. She got given a couple of smart light bulbs, installed them, didn't think much more of them. They were nice to have, bit of a gadget. Until over winter, she got caught working late in the office. Of course, by the time she left, it's pitch black. And she realized that while her dog was sat at home on its own, probably getting a little bit anxious, she could just switch the light on. Just so it could find its food, it could find its water, and also homes that have lights on are much more secure, much less risk of being burgled. Now, to change that conversation from, you can turn it on with your mobile phone, to I can know that I can give my dog peace of mind, and I can give myself peace of mind to know that my home is less of a target. That's a huge win on a very basic, very simple, and very human premise. So then we need to stop thinking about features, and we need to start thinking about lifestyle. That's going to be how we can start convincing people that actually the smart home is worth adopting, because it does bring value. It does have added value beyond the, oh, look what it can do. But then there's the next problem, is the unconscious bias within the tech industry. So we asked the question, okay, what does the smart home family look like? What does the standard user look like? What's the industry's idea of its own demographic? And I'll show you some examples. Tell me when you start noticing a pattern. You getting there? Yeah. All of them, practically every single example on most of these companies' websites are white families living in big, nice show homes, usually with 2 kids and a dog. And that's it. Now, every now and again, you'll get the token ethnic minority. Great. But, we as an agency are very conscious. Our leadership team is 2 women and a gay guy, and we're in a very sensitively male-dominated industry. And yet, the industry has a huge potential market that it's just not interested in, or at least not making the most of. And that's a shame, because in terms of marketing, your customers are your best marketing asset by far. You could release the best content in the world, you could have it going 24/7 and make great engaging content, but at the end of the day, if your customer is turning around and saying, style over substance, then it doesn't matter how good it is, how well priced it is, it's not going to make a difference. For 5 very good reasons. And those 5 reasons are that. In this modern world, where communication and content and your customer is king, that is the best selling point that you've got. And unless that you are actively engaging with your marketplace, not just at the point of delivery, but as part of the entire product design process, that is going to be more and more elusive. And we see it with brands that use social media effectively. You look, the most liked or most retweeted tweet on Twitter is from Burger King, taking a swipe at McDonald's, if I remember rightly. The whole reason, and this is one of the reasons that we launched the podcast, was that encouraging brands, encouraging teams to start interacting with their consumers is brilliant. And the companies that do it successfully have a great, they can prove it. They can prove the success rates. But it's not just about trying to sell the product. It's about humanizing the brand. And one of the most successful things that podcasts like ours do, and content when it's honest, is that it gives teams the ability to own their mistakes. That's something that's never really happened before. There's always been a PR side of things. And again, marketing agency, I know. But actually encouraging brands and companies to say, do you know what? If you messed it up, own it. Your clients are going to respect you more if you're honest with them. And the result of that, then, is brand loyalty. Now, that brings me quite nicely onto kind of the elephant in the room in terms of what's stopping the smart home market really taking off is trust. And as part of that, privacy. You ask anybody, most people on the street, if they're not using a smart home, one of the main answers that we get is, don't know how I feel about there being a speaker in my home or a microphone that listens to everything I say. Even industry professionals will quite publicly say, oh yeah, I got an Alexa, but I unplugged it. No, I didn't like it. But the concept of having a microphone in your house, that's not new, right? Every single one of us, I'm guessing, in the room has a smartphone. Now, if you don't believe that your smartphone is listening to everything you say when you're using some of the apps, then I applaud you. But even there is an element of suspicion. One of the most common things that comes in, if you go to tech events, like the swag bags that you get, one of the most common things you'll get is the little shutter for the webcam hole. How many of you have got those on your laptops? bits of tape. Yeah, there you go. Bits of blue tape. People still have it. And yet their mobile phone is sat there completely uncovered, presumably. There's a balance and there's a trade-off here between privacy and lifestyle. And at the end of the day, most consumers are happy to sign the terms and conditions and give up some of that privacy to improve their lifestyle. And certain brands are cottoning onto this, especially when you look at how data is sold and made use of by certain companies. Others are making a real point about being very protective over your data. And one of those is Apple. Apple say very publicly that they believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. And whether or not that's your heart rate after a run, which news stories you read first, where you bought your last coffee, and so on and so forth, all of that data belongs to you. It's on your device. That's it. And that leads me on to something that product designers and the whole industry needs to start thinking about in more detail, is the concept of privacy by design. Now, this is not a new concept, but this is becoming more and more pertinent in the smart home market, where people are genuinely being stopped entering the market because they don't trust the brands that are selling them the products. Now, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here, so bear with. The European Commission, and I know a Brit saying European Commission at the moment, it's never good, but there we go, have something called SafetyGate. Give it its full title, is Rapid Alert System for Dangerous Non-Food Products. It is essentially the system, if there are any products on the market that the European Commission have identified a risk with, for example, a choking hazard, or if there's toxic paint on like a toy or something like that, then they're responsible for the product recalls. Earlier this year, for the first time, they recalled this product. Did anybody hear about this? No? Okay. This is a smartwatch marketed towards children. And it was a way for kids to stay in contact with their parents. It had a built-in phone that you could ring emergency contacts and a GPS tracker. Now, I'm not going to read you the full report, but you can probably guess what's coming. It was completely unencrypted. Anybody could get access to the location history, stored phone numbers, serial numbers, and not only that, they could communicate with a child wearing it and locate them through GPS. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, there were trackers in it as well for Google, Umeng, and Baidu to serve ads. Now, this is the first time that the European Commission SafetyGate made a decision to do a product recall based purely on privacy. The product was perfectly safe physically, but it violated that fundamental concept of privacy. And so they recalled every single one, not just the ones that were currently being sold in the shops or just the remaining stock. Anyone that bought one, they recalled it. They considered the risk so great. And that's why when we're looking at the product design process, all the way from sketched concept to research, development, marketing, and release, privacy has got to be at the center of that design. That is what is stopping the smart home market taking off, because people are suspicious. But as we've seen with mobile phones, people are willing to give up some of that privacy, some of their data, if it can improve their lifestyle. Dr. MADELINE CARR works for a lot of sort of international cybersecurity boards and advisory panels and things like that. And she gave an interview to BBC Radio earlier this year, a couple of weeks ago. And a couple of the really interesting quotes that came out of this. The first one was that she said that the company that centers on privacy is going to win the race. No matter how strong certain companies' market share might be right now, as privacy becomes more and more important into the industry, they will easily get overtaken. But she also gave a bit of a warning, which was that we risk creating a dual marketplace where privacy is reserved for the wealthy, for those that can afford to pay more for a product or for a brand that prioritizes the privacy of its users. So how do we avoid that happening? As an industry, we need to work together. Despite the industry being 25, 30 years old, there is no industry standard for security or for privacy. There's international standards for everything from project management to IT security, but all of these devices, the whole IoT ecosystem, there's nothing there. And that's why we are encouraging those conversations. So the Smart Life podcast is a great way to get retailers and manufacturers in a room and to start talking more candidly and more openly about their products. It's a way for the consumer to say, okay, I've heard about these products. Now would be a great chance to hear about them from the people that make them. And also organizations like the Smart Homes and Buildings Association, which has sort of headquarters, I suppose, in the UK, but across Europe as well. It's a forum, it's a consortium for the industry to get together and start talking about this. And if that means starting to own industry standards, then that's going to be how we are going to tackle the smart home adoption problem. Because the smart home industry is kind of where the PC industry was 20 years ago, where the mobile phone industry was 10 years ago. Like, it's there. The early adopters are in place, they're championing it, but we haven't quite crossed that chasm into wider adoption. And on that, I think that's me. So, thank you very much.
Very cool. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
The people who come to Product Crunch a lot know that the best part of the event is the Q&A after each talk. And most of the time, the audience is just as interesting and smart as the speakers. So, who wants to ask the first question to Thomas?
Well, either I did a really great job. Okay, this one, that's fine.
Everyone else can think of new questions while we move along here.
Hey, hi. Thank you for the talk. How do you deal with your clients that are open to, dealing with clients' privacy, customers' privacy, and the damage that is done by bigger companies like Google that bought Nest that just happened to have a microphone in it for 2 years that wasn't spoken about earlier and it wasn't in manuals?
Yeah, at the moment, because of the sheer market share of some of the giants like Amazon and like Google, any privacy concerns that some of the people that are being bought out are going to get forgotten. And I think that's kind of just a bit of a harsh truth of the industry at the moment. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think that, like I say, for Amazon and Google, no matter how big they are, if people start rejecting them because they're like, well, actually, no, do you know what? Facebook is seeing a huge decline in users at the moment because of all the privacy problems that they're having. So I think that the industry has room for growth in terms of, especially when there are acquisitions of products and brands and things like that. I think that actually in the future, brands are going to be able to say, okay, yes, you can acquire us, but privacy is very important to our, it's the core of our business, and you need to respect that. I don't necessarily know that is the case, but I certainly hope so in the future. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for the talk. It was a real delight listening to you.
Thank you.
So you're talking about privacy by design. It's interesting because I've learned exactly the same thing over the course of the past few weeks because I'm working on a similar product. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is really how do you integrate that actually and put that into work? And where do you integrate it? At what point do you tackle this issue?
See, I have the joy of being in marketing where I don't actually have to answer those questions. I leave it to you guys to do it. No, it's a very interesting point. And I think that the answer probably comes from it has to be a consideration from the very start. Before you even start thinking about how it's going to work, you need to commit to it and say, no, okay, do you know what? we'll find a way to make it work. Now, with the globalization of data, and the fact that so many data centers are being outsourced and so on and so forth, it's tricky. And I don't necessarily, and it's another one, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily know the answer. But I think there's a balance, because some of the larger, sort of more expensive systems that deal in sort of home automation, they will have, it's all on-premise. All of the data that's captured, they will have a room in the house dedicated to house the server with all of the wires going into it. Nothing's in the cloud. And that's an example of where privacy by design, but of course, then that comes at a huge price tag that you can't shove it into a data center somewhere and have it processed elsewhere. So I don't necessarily have a specific answer for you, but I think that even having the conversation and being aware of it is a real step forward to making it, even if not, so just to go on a tangent, Apple, for example, they still collect a huge amount of data, but it's all anonymized. They use it to identify usage patterns, but none of it is specific. So they've built privacy into the core of their service model, in that they don't then sell that data on a third party to serve you ads based on your usage habits. Whereas companies like Amazon and Google will. So it's an example of where you can still collect data and use it to improve your services, but not use it for financial gain or profit. Does that answer your question? Kind of, a little bit. We'll have a chat afterwards. I'll have a think about it.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a really great talk, really enjoyed it. I really was struck by your observation of the average smart home family. I was getting really excited about your suggestion that there could be more valuable uses of the smart home for people who didn't look like that family. Could you expand on that at all, or what are some of the other opportunities that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we sort of are doing some case studies at the moment, and we're preparing use cases. We're preparing content that essentially demonstrates use cases. And one of the most effective we found so far is, and then this is going really quite specific, but single mum, it's chucking it down with rain. She's got a kid running off one hand. She's got all the bags of shopping. She's soaking wet. She gets to her front door, and it's something as basic as all the lights turning on for her. Kitchen lights turn on, so she doesn't have to put all of her shopping down, switch on the light, pick everything back up again. It's the small incremental changes. And also things like showing how the smart home can be used to make incremental changes in people's routines. And this is something that, you don't have to have 2 kids and a dog and a beautiful show home. And Jess, our managing director, when we're talking to clients, we talk about the Californication of the marketing. I mean, it's so bland. We all know it's bland. But even, do you know what? Using same-sex couples to show them on their morning routine, to show their smart speaker waking them up, turning on their bedside lamps, giving them a summary of the headlines, what the weather's going to be, and how long it's going to take to get to work. Rather than showing, oh, it's a beautiful show home, and oh, it can do this, this, and this, and this, just showing an actual real-life use case with real-life people is by far going to be more effective. And there is a balance, because the smart home, because of the high price point that a lot of these products carry, it's still an aspirational product. And there is a bit of a dichotomy, because you're trying to sell that aspirational element, but you're trying to sell it through using everyday situations. And where we're seeing the most success is, I think the industry, to a extent, it's still fixated on the idea that of the smart home, even the name. When the fridge freezer came out, when the vacuum cleaner came out, it was great technology, but now it's just a part of our lives. That's going to be the real success of the smart home, is when we stop calling it the smart home, when it's just the home. That's just what light fixtures do. That's just how the house works. So showing that as a reality, I think, is going to get us there. The other thing as well, actually, sorry, I know I'm going on a real tangent here. Germany's a slight exception, but in most of Europe, the primary, the people spending the most amount of money on smart home devices, women between 25 and 40. Not that you'd know. And also, especially in the UK, with the sort of housing crisis we've got, we have a whole millennial generation, which is exactly that age group, more or less unable to buy their own homes. So there are this target market that want to personalize their space, but can't do it through fixtures and fittings and putting up wallpaper. So giving them the tools to customize their space without, damaging the property or changing it. That's another example of where we're using, young renting couple who can make it feel more like a home through technology. Cool.
Are you happy with the answer? Good enough.
Oh, I think it's this one at the back. Yeah.
Hi. Hi, I'm also this beautiful lady who just questioned you, which we also have this issue raised in the few weeks with the testing, that the security is a very big thing. Even though you deliver the function very well, still people are not happy because they're scared or anxious about the security issues. And you said we have to work on together. And I'm just particularly curious, how is the beacon's effort to change the perception for security? Since you have made examples that, for example, we have the mobile phone or camera or MacBook that you can have already listen to the voice, but you don't really care about it. Probably because the phone is doing too much influence on your life. But the IoT devices or other apps are still having problems to be close to the users. And what is the beacons or personal level of efforts to change this perception about the security?
It's a really good question. And I apologize, because I know I'm saying I don't necessarily have an answer, quite a fair bit. But I think it goes back to one of the first things that you said there is, okay, you've delivered the features. I think that product designers, developers need to stop back and say, right, what's the trade-off? Are the features that we're delivering able to help the end users enough that if there are security concerns, or not concerns that it's insecure, but if there are, the customer's going to be okay with that? And I think also it comes back to education. A huge amount of the responses we got from the industry was that the customers don't even understand how these products work. And that's why we set up the podcast. We're like, well, okay, let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation. For example, you go out and you're looking at, fake news on social media and, people saying, oh, well, I wouldn't have this because it listens to everything I say and the CIA are listening in. Oh, yeah, but sure, when I took that Facebook quiz 5 years ago, I completely signed, my entire life's data away and all of my friends, by the way. So I think a huge part of this is education and trying to inform the end user that actually, a lot of these companies will have your data, but they're going to use it to improve the service. Because I think there's a sort of unspoken reality that people think their lives are far more interesting than they actually are, right? So not that I'm advocating a police state or anything like that, where everyone's listened into, but I think just making people more aware, just educating people to also be more diligent in what they are signing up for. So if, for example, that watch, had some of those parents kind of just had some of the knowledge of how the technology works, would they have questioned it a bit more before buying it? So I think there is an onus on product owners to think about, the features and how they can help people, but also our job as marketers and the wider industry, there needs to be a conversation that takes place between everyone.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Do you have a question as well?
Hi.
I think it's, oh, sorry. There's one at the front afterwards. Sorry. Yes, hello.
Hi, my name is Ivan. Thanks a lot for the speech. It's really inspiring to to listen to. I have a question about what do you think when this change in the market will happen, when the market will get mature, when we will have this privacy, security-oriented big business and big enterprise companies providing the products to mass market? Thank you.
I think it's beginning to happen for certain products. So in the UK, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, every year they update the shopping basket of goods that is used to measure inflation in the economy. Now, this year, envelopes were out of the shopping basket, but smart speakers were in. And it's the first of the smart home devices that are now being used to measure inflation in the UK. So they are beginning to have that impact in people's homes that are significant enough that financial organizations are beginning to take notice and saying, okay, these things exist. And you take a look at the Amazon Echo devices, and smart speakers by far have the biggest inlay into the market. About 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas, at the beginning of December, Amazon had sold out for 2 months. Now, yes, okay, they are still being bought as presents rather than people going out and actually buying them, but people are now considering them a part of everyday life. The other thing as well is that because of the high price point, and because I don't think necessarily that people have the appetite to go and spend thousands of pounds on or euros, on something that they already have, we're beginning to see, and this is why wearable tech is beginning to make an inlay into the market, is that it's being offered as part of a service. So, for example, there are insurance providers in the health insurance market who will give you an Apple Watch as part of your plan so they can measure how healthy you're being. Because, of course, the healthier you are, the less they might have to pay out. And they also means that the healthier you are, they sort of give you rewards like cinema tickets and things like that. So I think that we could see a huge expanse if the home insurance market take on offering things like motion detectors and smart locks and video doorbells to increase the security of people's homes. I think that could be a real big push that we see wider adoption in the market. Cool.
Thanks. This is the very last question
Sorry,
for Thomas.
I'll stop rambling as well. Sorry.
So you mentioned that Facebook has been seeing a constant decline in the number of users, but on the other hand, Instagram is constantly growing and it's still a Facebook company. And I think that people are really good at replacing things, like they had replaced Orkut with Facebook and now Facebook with Instagram, but I don't think that they would entirely stop using these services. And and that brings me to the question that do you really think that the privacy is the only issue that Facebook is facing? Or rather, do you think that privacy is going to be at the forefront of things in the future?
Oh, that's a big question. I think as people become more and more educated, privacy is going to be a greater concern. I don't think it's going to be the be-all and end-all. I don't think it's going to stop the market, but I certainly think it's going to help drive adoption if the industry acknowledges it, at least. But you're right, there is a problem, well, not necessarily a problem, but if people abandon one platform and go and use the other, they're not escaping the problem, because that's how a lot of these companies build their business model. So I think it goes back to the question of education. And if people being better educated means that these companies alter their policies, I think that is probably going to be how things evolve in the future. Cool. I'll stop talking now. Thank you very much,
Thomas.
everyone.